So today we're making a Genoise sponge cake. Now, what is a Genoise sponge cake? Well, essentially it is a foam-based sponge cake, traditionally made with whole eggs which are whipped into a foam, and this acts as the leavening agent to create the signature fluffy texture. Now, of course, we are making a plant-based vegan alternative today using an egg replacer to create that same leavening function, creating the foam. So I'm going to get started showing you how to do it now. So I've gone ahead and mise en place all of my ingredients. Everything has all been measured and weighed out. We are making a matcha or a green tea variation today, but essentially you can do this in a plain variety as well. You just want to omit the green tea and vitamin C powder, and I'll get a little bit more into that shortly. But first off, we're going to start foaming our vegan eggs. So to do that, I'm using my stand mixer today, but essentially you could use a hand mixer to whip everything. So we are creating the same type of foam that you would get from a traditional Genoise, but we are using a vegan egg replacer. That being the panis egg, which is a potato protein blend, and that's going to replace the same functions, that foaming ability. It's also going to create structure and coagulate when it's cooked. So it's going to allow us to have a lovely, spongy and light cake without having to use eggs. So I'm going to mix this with my water. So I'll put my water into my stand mixer bowl along with my panis egg powder. Because there's no fat in panis egg, we're going to be adding a little bit of the oil as well. And this is going to give a nice moist texture to the cake as well. And because the panis egg does not have a yellow color, we're going to be adding a little bit of turmeric just to give the signature look that you would get to a traditional egg-based sponge. So just going to add that in. And just with a hand whisk, I'm just going to whisk those ingredients together just to help start dissolve everything. So let's get this on our mix now with our ball whisk attachment, and we're going to whip this on a low speed for a couple of minutes or just until it starts to get foamy. So our vegan egg has been whipping for about a minute or two, and you'll notice that it will start to get a little bit foamy. Now at this stage, I'm going to add about a tablespoon of sugar, and we're going to get it back on the mixer and increase the speed to like a medium speed. So I'm going to put this on a medium speed, and we want to bring this to a foam so it's like doubled in size. So be patient, this can take a little bit of time. So our vegan egg has been mixing for, I don't know, about 5 minutes or so. As you can see, it has foamed up, it's doubled in size. We're going to get this back onto a medium speed and slowly add a spoonful of sugar at a time. And we want to beat it on that medium speed for a couple of minutes between each addition. Just be very patient. This is going to take a little bit longer than using traditional eggs, but we are going to create a lovely foam. So we've been whipping our vegan eggs, I would say probably in total, maybe 12 to 15 minutes. So it does take some time, and you'll see that it's almost like a soft peak, maybe a little bit less, like just before a soft peak. So as you can see, we have some beautiful foaming action. It's very, very similar to beating whole eggs into a foam. You can see it running off. Just takes a little bit of time and some patience. So now we have our lovely vegan egg foam that we've mixed with the sugar. We can start preparing the matcha or our green tea component. So with matcha, if you are adding it to any type of cake, it is a good idea to activate it so we can get the most out of the flavor and for it to be incorporated well into the batter. So to do that, I'm gonna grab myself a large bowl. I'm gonna sift our matcha into the bowl. Now, something that you may have found when you start working with natural food colorings like matcha or things like beetroot powder, when you cook them in the oven, they often change color. However, I'm going to show you a way that you can prevent it from becoming a darker green color, and that's using vitamin C powder. So vitamin C powder, it's also known as ascorbic acid. Essentially, it's pure vitamin C, and you can find this in your local pharmacy or health supplement store online. And we use it in very small quantities. Often bakers will use it to strengthen the gluten of their bread products and create a soft crumb to their bread. And we can use it in this instance for some of those properties. So for strengthening gluten, to help us use this to roll into a Swiss roll, and also for maintaining the color because it's going to prevent the pH from changing with heat. All right, so now that we've got that in there, we're gonna add a little bit of warm water. So about a tablespoon of warm water. Grab my tablespoon here. And this is just hot water out of the tap. And just with a spatula, I'm just mixing it until it forms a paste. So we have this green paste, just to make sure that there's no lumps. Now to our green paste, we're going to be adding some of our vegan egg foam. Just enough to loosen it. So I've just put in maybe half of a cup or so. So we're sacrificing a little bit of our vegan egg foam. And we want to mix that together until it loosens up our matcha paste. Just make sure you get all in the corners, and then you'll end up with this kind of loose foam, green foam, so that's fine. We just want it to be loose enough so we can fold in the rest of our vegan egg foam. So once that's done, we can add our remaining vegan egg foam. And we're going to fold everything together gently. We don't want to lose too much of that volume. So just be patient. We want to scrape underneath the bowl and then fold it over. Scrape around, fold over, and then you want to turn the bowl as you go. And you want to continue doing that until you can't see any streaks of that green tea. Okay, that's looking good to me. So now we can move on to our dry ingredients. So for our dry ingredients, we are using some all-purpose flour. I'm also using a small portion of potato starch. Now I like to use potato starch in some of my recipes for cakes and cookies. It's going to help keep our cake nice and moist and very soft. And we're also adding a little bit of baking powder. Just want to whisk all of my dry ingredients together so they're evenly dispersed. Now we can start incorporating our dry ingredients into our foam. So I like to add about a third of my dry ingredients at a time and just sift those in so there's no lumps. Now we're going to gently fold these through until they're incorporated. We want to try not to deflate our batter too much, so just be gentle. Once most of that flour is completely coated with the foam, we can continue on with the remaining portions. So just adding a little at a time. So once all of those dry ingredients have been incorporated and you can't see any dry flour in there, I like to switch to my whisk and do a few strokes, maybe 5 or 6, just to ensure that there's no larger lumps of flour in there. Now we can start putting our cake batter onto our tray. Now I've just taken a large tray and flipped it over. And on top of that, I have a silicone mat. I like to use the silicone mats because I find that they won't get wrinkly and you get a really beautiful flat base to your sponge. And I'm just going to lightly spray it with a little bit of oil. Now, one of the great things about this vegan sponge cake, Genoise sponge cake, is you don't need to use a frame or a cake form for it. You can just put it straight on the tray and spread it out. So you just want to spread it out as evenly as possible. So once you have it all nice and even on your tray, this can get going into our preheated oven. Because I am using this sponge cake for a Swiss roll, baking is very important. We want to ensure that it's not underbaked or overbaked, because if it's underbaked, it's going to still be too wet inside. And if it's overbaked, it's going to be harder to roll. So it's important to check for the signs. In my oven, I know that it takes about 14 minutes to cook, but it's going to be a little bit different depending on whether you have a convection oven or a conventional oven, so one with a fan or one without. So we're going to keep an eye on this and check it at about the 12-minute mark and see how it's going. So my alarm has just gone off, and I can see we're just starting to get a tiny bit of color, but I want to pop it on for just 2 more minutes, just to ensure it's fully cooked through. I can just see the tiniest bit of color just on the edge, but I'm going to do 14 minutes on this. I think that that will be fine for my oven. If you're cooking it too long, you'll start to see that it will start to crack. So we want to cook it before we get to that stage. Our sponge cake is ready. I'm just going to open the door a crack, and I'm going to let my sponge cake actually cool in the oven for about 30 to 45 minutes. And I like to do this because I like to cool it down slowly so we can really ensure that we get as much structure in our sponge cake, so the cake is setting in the place that we want it to set. Because we're incorporating so much foam, you'll notice that this cake is not going to rise really too much during the baking process because we've already added so much air. So we're just going to cool it down very slowly. And yeah, we'll come back here in about 30 minutes. So I've just pulled my sponge, my Genoise sponge, out of the oven. It's still a little bit warm. It's been in there for about 35 minutes, cooling down. So we're going to flip this over onto a cooling rack. But what I like to do first is just drag that mat onto the cooling rack. Just makes it easier to handle. And then with a sheet of baking paper, we're going to place that over the top. Another cooling rack. And then just gently flip over. And we're just going to carefully peel back our silicone mat. And just cover your sponge cake with a tea towel, and we're going to set that aside to completely cool down. So probably like another 30 minutes or so.